Welcome back to our podcast Because the World Needs Water. Porque o mundo precisa de água. I'm Everton de Oliveira, Professor Água, and today we delve into a topic that affects every living being on this planet, yet often remains outside the mainstream climate conversation: groundwater. We are honored to host an individual whose career has been dedicated to understanding the subterranean world and linking it directly to global sustainability and climate adaptation efforts. Sorry for my English. We recently sat down with Dr. Warren Wood, a close friend. He's very good guy. I love talking to him. He's a truly distinguished figure in the field of hydrogeology and subsurface chemistry, hydrogeochemistry. Dr. Wood currently serves as visiting professor of hydrogeology in the Department of Earth Sciences and Environmental Science at the Michigan State University. His extensive career includes pivotal roles such as research hydrologist for the U.S. Geological Survey and the Hanna Professor of Integrated Studies at the Michigan State University. Dr. Wood is celebrated for his deep conceptual work in hydrogeochemistry, demonstrating how groundwater flow and chemistry are inextricably linked. Well, my friends, that's hard. I have another interview. Please take a look at his book, the link below, you're going to see. In this episode, he takes on a journey from the deepest aquifers to the highest level of global climate policy. We began by discussing a startling statistic from his research. Approximately 25% of the current global ocean rise comes from groundwater that is being pumped out of aquifers and sent to the oceans. Amazing number. This unsustainable groundwater extraction, driven by agricultural and municipal use, is dewatering aquifers at a rate of 150 to 200 cubic kilometers a year. I repeat, 150 to 200 cubic kilometers a year. Warren Wood emphasized that while this depletion is serious, it creates available storage space. Therefore, aggressive managed aquifer recharge strategies must now be viewed as critical component of international climate mitigation. This is not intended to solve climate change entirely, but rather to serve as a mitigation strategy to buy governments time to transition from fossil fuels to renewable sources like photovoltaic, geothermal, and wind power. This led us to the sponge planet concept, championed by his late co-author Kanjian Wu. This philosophy suggests that instead of rushing water away, we should aim to save it, implementing slow water movements. Take a look at my interview with Erica Geis, who wrote a very nice book, Water Always Wins, about the slow water movement. Warren will explain why the traditional large gray infrastructures, such as massive dams, often creates unintended consequences, like impacting oceanic bionetworks by restricting silica flow or reducing crucial wetlands. The sponge planet model, in contrast, promotes cheaper local structures that utilize natural systems like parks and wetlands to control floods and droughts and reduce waterborne disease. He argues that building on floodplains, which are often rebuilt with federal support, is simply insane. When then explore the memory held within the chemistry of water, drawing on concepts from his book, which he jokingly notes has been referred to as thermodynamics for music majors. Warren Wood explains that water chemistry holds a record of thousands of years of processes like ion exchange and mineral precipitation. Understanding these basic natural processes is critical because humanity and most animals require water quality within a fairly narrow range for drinking. This knowledge compels us to design systems that protect water quality and composition inherited by future generations. Finally, Dr. Warren Wood shared his newest, potentially paradigm-shifting scientific proposition concerning the global carbon cycle. He suggests, he suggests that the role of rock weathering in controlling atmospheric CO2 may be relatively minor when compared to the burial of and growth of vegetation. He introduced the concept that aquifer systems are the womb of weathering, which he poetically described as the ruin of continents and the nutrients of life. This observation suggests that most weathering occurs within the aquifer systems, isolated from the atmosphere, and if accepted, it could fundamentally change the way scientists and policymakers think about carbon cycling and climate mitigation. He expects this idea to face significant professional rejection, noting that selling new concepts against the scientific mainstream is always difficult. From global sea level rise to the microscopic chemistry of our deepest waters, this episode with Dr. Warren Wood provides a truly essential perspective on our planet's future. Please stay with us for the full enlightening discussion with Dr. Warren Wood. Welcome, Warren. Thank you for showing up today, Warren. That's very nice. I thought of you reading I read your paper with Kong Yang. How do you say Kong Jiang? Kong Jiang?
That's the way I pronounce it. I'm not
Okay.
sure. My Chinese is not great.
Exactly. Okay. And Erica, about that. I have actually, we've been thinking, and that's the idea. Uh, I always worried about as a hydrogeologist of of recharge. I followed the guys on monitored aquifer recharge, but I always think that those are small actions compared to what we really need. We need to store huge amount of water, right, in the continent to keep, the ecology healthy and all else. And then you had that publication that mentioned that about 25% of the ocean rise uh, comes from groundwater that's being pumped out and sent to the oceans. That's quite impressive. So I'd like to have you helping us thinking about this thing. You're always, you have this connection between unsustainable groundwater extraction and the environmental shifts. And I'd like you to elaborate a bit how the depletion of aquifers driven by agriculture or municipal use for our own sake, how this contributes to the acceleration of the global sea level rise, and why aggressive aquifer recharge strategy must be considered now as a critical component of international climate mitigation. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Well, I have a little bit. I'll comment. I'm not sure how articulate I will be, but in essence, we're now dewatering the aquifer at about a rate of 150 to 200 cubic kilometers a year. So that's a fair amount of water,
Yep.
and that means that we have some space available for recharge. If we're dewatering this aquifer, obviously we can put in essentially what we take out. And what I suggested was that we could reduce people along the coastal areas. The United States, for example, has a large coastal area, both east and west coasts and the Gulf. And a significant amount of land is threatened by sea level rise. Well, if we could reduce it a little bit, all we're looking for is a bit of storage time. We're not going to solve global climate change by recharge. There's no way to that. This is a mitigation strategy to give us time to convert from fossil fuels to a renewable, and probably photovoltaic and geothermal and wind power. That looks like clearly the future for right now. The economics are overwhelmingly in favor of that. But this will give us time because the governments act very slowly, and not all governments are engaged in. We have political changes we particularly have at this particular time who are opposed to any kind of renewable resources. So that this gives us, if we could recharge some of the water that is now going into the ocean back into the aquifer system, then we could at least delay by a number of years so people could build structures or adjust the infrastructure to increase sea level. And it also has
Agree.
so that's essentially the story.
Hmm, interesting. So the
So,
decrease the sea level. So, but the thing is that well, let go back a bit to your article. The article for those who
okay.
don't know, it's to solve climate change, we need to restore our sponge planet, right? That's
Well, I think, quite honestly, the title is a little aggressive. I'm not sure we're going to solve climate change, but it's the idea. It was an editorial, so it's the idea was to get your attention, and it does have because climate change has a huge impact on droughts and flooding, and that's where it's going to really impact the water resources aspect. And so the sponge city or sponge planet is Conjing had envisioned is an important component of controlling floods and a drought situation. Or it's a mitigation of droughts and floods. You can't change, or very difficult to change the climate change itself, but we can at least address sort of mitigate some of the aspects of it. Again, give us some more time. I look at it anyway as an opportunity to give us more time to adjust to the changing climate.
hmm. Yeah. Well, the thing is that I interviewed Erica Guys, and she's been working on the like a slow water movement,
Yes.
something.
Yeah, she has a lovely book out, very readable book.
Yes, I read that. It's very readable. I agree with you. It's very nice, and it's. I told her for a non-hydrogeologist, she did quite well, right?
Yes, actually, she's a really interesting lady to talk to. I not known her before we worked on this paper together, but she was very helpful and very pleasant to work with. Just a lovely individual, as well as being, I thought, a very skilled writer.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But well, this is what I see about that you worked on the topic. And well, first of all, I'm curious. How did they get to know you, Kong Jiang
Well,
and Erica? They just found you. They found you on the internet or something?
yeah, I suspect it came from that. I'd written an editorial with Dave Hyman about the change in, I think in 2018 in groundwater.
I
Uh,
remember with John, right? With John Cherry.
No, this one was with Dave Hyman, who
Okay.
was my chair of my department. And anyway, a hydrogeologist, really a skilled hydrogeologist. Anyway, we chatted over coffee about this, and I finally put together a few notes and published it as an editorial. And I think probably Kanjan picked this up because it really is consistent with what his views are of his sponge planet. He wanted to slow the water and make using water in a more, I guess, archaeological sense. The way water really works in an anthropogenically changed system. I guess I'm babbling here, but so it fit with him and with his philosophy, and he contacted me by email, and we went back and forth. But he was very generous. He and Erica wrote most of that. I reviewed it, of course, and added some bits and bobs. But basically, it's his idea. And his unfortunate death is
Oh,
really
tell me,
a
tell me.
terrible
He died.
loss.
He died in Brazil. He took a small plane. That was so
Oh,
sad.
awful.
Yeah,
Yeah, and he
that's
was
awful. Yeah.
probably involved with this. My understanding, and he was involved with making a documentary when
Yes.
this plane crashed. And that's just because he wasn't an old guy.
No,
It's
it was
if I
young. Yes.
die, nobody cares. I'm almost 90. nobody makes it. It wouldn't make
Well,
any difference.
people
But
care. Come
this
on.
guy was young and dynamic, and it's just an unfortunate situation.
Okay, so for those who don't know, what is the concept? Since you're a co-author of that, what is the concept of the sponge planet model? You're
Well, it's just
responsible for that paper as well.
as I said, my contribution was minimal, and Kojin was very generous in his authorship. I did decline it, but he insisted that I be an author on it, and I was pleased actually with somebody of that stature to be associated with. It was a positive thing. But yeah, his idea is just to use water. Don't get rid of it. Don't rush it off in the terms
Yeah.
of get rid of it, but to save it, make parks and use it with wetlands. One of the things that people don't realize is that most of the wetlands in the world have been decimated by building
Drained,
dams
drained, yes,
and filling them and utilizing this space. And of course, in the wetlands, they were wetlands. They get flooded. And of course, we have the
exactly.
flood insurance. Why are we flooding every 10, 12, 15 years? It drives me nuts that our federal government supports rebuilding on floodplains. I think they ought to be park benches and the necessary ports for transportation. But my gosh, building on a floodplain is insane.
It
I mean, as
is.
a
Well,
hydrogeologist.
it is. And I don't know how the this industry, the real estate industry keeps putting money on that. Like expensive places, they should have a lower value.
Yeah,
Simple
put
as
in
that.
crops are fine. You're going to lose a crop every few years. Okay. You build that into the cost of your operation, or as I say, make so many of these things parks, park benches, and people where they can walk and bicycle and enjoy the occasional bird and the odd beaver that you might see, or an otter or something like
I
that.
know, but
That's always
we humans are very adaptable. Have you ever been to to Manaus, the capital of the Amazon state here in Brazil?
no. I've never been to Brazil. It's one of my bucket lists, and it probably
Oh man, you
not going
should.
to happen.
That's
But I'd
quite
love to.
interesting because the river floods, but it floods every year, but it floods like you know up to 20 meters.
Wow, that's
That's a lot of water. That's a lot
yeah.
of water. It's amazing. It's amazing. It becomes an ocean, but it's good to go on a dry season and a wet season there.
Yeah, I've seen National Geographic has
But
done
then,
some
but then you,
really
you have the houses. They're on top of piles, like 20-meter up there. And they're living on those things. It's called palafitas. It's quite interesting to see because
I,
part of the year, the water is right on at the bottom of the house, and then it's down there so far. It's amazing. So
yeah.
people still live in that situation. So
Well, as you mentioned, we're quite adaptable as humans.
yep,
We've occupied everything except the Arctic and the Antarctic.
yeah. But let
So,
me ask you one thing. That I was thinking about this slow water strategies that is part of the idea of the sponge planet, right?
mm, yes,
Uh, let's say,
essentially the same thing.
yeah. So Erica claims that it's usually cheaper, and it makes sense. Uh, and it lowers the waterborne diseases compared to traditional gray infrastructure. Uh, how can we, if we do that, is it possible, thinking on a hydrogeology perspective, increasing this amount of recharge? Let's assume that we could do that on all agricultural cultural areas. Would that be doable? What
Well,
do you think?
it's an interesting the concepts are quite different than we're generally used to thinking about engineering structure, large structures, dams supported by government generally solves a particular problem. Frequently, it'll create other problems. For example, building a dam really reduces the amount of wetlands behind the dam, and it creates, the case of silica, for example, a lot of diatoms are formed behind dams, and therefore the silica does not get to the ocean. And there's a huge oceanic bio network that depends on the silica. So building dams has an impact on the food supply coming out of the marine environment. So the point is that you solve one problem, sometimes it creates another, and it's unintended consequences kind of thing. And
Yeah.
many of the structures are, I'm not knocking the engineers. I have an engineering background, so I don't mean to knock engineering, but I just think that some of the things are very specific and it's not helpful and it's hugely expensive. You can add a huge amount of small structures supported by local funding
Yeah.
relative to a large multi-billion-dollar dam system. But
Yes, it's true. That's true.
again, that's a
And
choice.
you mentioned silica, but it's typical for us that we deal with hydrogeochemistry and hydrogeology in general, and that we see that it's a totally different world from surface water, and people think differently, and they don't. Some people don't even understand what's going on, and then they don't have a clue. And most of the grace infrastructure that we have is based only on surface water. They don't really care about anything else.
Well,
And
I don't think it. Remember that groundwater really wasn't a functional part of society until the late 1920s, when high-powered pumps became available.
yeah,
Up to that time, it was kind of windmills and old oaken buckets with a little duck
exactly. Yes,
well. And so it's really been since the 1930s, I would say, and at least in the United States, and I think that's probably true globally,
everywhere.
that we've been able to exploit groundwater, and it's been a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
But we've overdone it in the point where we have dewatered many of the aquifers, not to the point where there's no water, but usually it's more expensive because you have to lift it higher and there's less available. So you have to have more wells to get the same amount of support. And so it's been and I don't think our thought processes have evolved with the development. It's been a little lagging in terms of how we need to have sustainability. And
Mhm.
again, we could, although almost all river water is allocated, it's difficult to say I want 5,000 CFS out of a river because that water is already allocated for dilution or agriculture or some other aspect. So I say that we could recharge the water, but there's a lot of political and consequences of taking that water that is now utilized for a variety of other sources. So there's no free lunch out there, but you have to
No,
try to think through the whole process. If you do this, then this, and this, and funding of these things is tricky. It could be all federal, it could be all private, it could be some mixture of that.
yeah,
You have the
yeah,
funding for design, you have funding for construction, you have funding for operation, and that can be each one of those can be part of private and
and
part government. So it's kind of complicated. I mean, it's not trivial.
it's not. It's not. I agree with you. I agree with you. So, in your book, you discuss how geochemistry of water reveals a memory, a record of thousands of years of process like ion exchange and mineral precipitation. And by the way, I really, really enjoyed your book there because your explanation is was so, I would say, digestible. I could get that so easily, I say, well, I've been studying and using, like say, activity for so long, and now you come with this easy to think explanation. That was very nice. But if,
Well, thank you. My some of my colleagues have said that's thermodynamics for music majors. So that's
well,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
that was my goal because there's a lot of people getting involved with groundwater, attorneys and policy people that are not as careful as Erica was with her analysis. And so this was designed to provide just a little bit of an introduction so that they can at least speak to professionals, and I understand and are on the same language basis. Because thermodynamics can get pretty hairy looking, the equations
Oh,
pretty
yeah, yeah,
quick.
yeah. Agree,
And
agree.
that really is a big turnoff for a lot of people who are more policy or less technically oriented.
Yeah, but
Anyway,
the concept is all there. And it's you can grab it easily from what you put in there. So
yeah.
that was quite an achievement, I think. So back
Well,
to what I was asking you then. If we understand the story of, the memory story, as you argue, how does that knowledge compel us to change our current practices so
well,
that we preserve this resource, the groundwater, ensuring that the water quality and composition inherited by the future generations is safeguarded.
Well, I'm a great believer that you learn from history, and if you know the mechanisms that have controlled the water chemistry. So again, chemistry, unlike hydrogeology, chemistry, water chemistry has a memory, and
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. Analytically, you can detect about, if there's about 1 × 10⁻¹5 atoms present. You have to have that many atoms present of an element before you can even detect it. And so the 10 to 15, that's
That's,
molecules. I mean, that's a lot of molecules before you can even detect it, 1 part per billion. There's like 10 to the 23rd is the one is a sort of a mole
yeah,
of,
it's the Avogadro number. Yes.
yeah, that's right. And so you figure you can get 1 part per billion. That's 1 × 10⁹. So subtract that, and your
Take.
limit is down to about 10⁻14 or something like that. I mean, I
Yep.
don't want to get technical here, but it's pretty simple. And but so there's a lot of chemistry there that you never see. But there is a memory because a lot of things happen through this water because over the last thousands, tens of thousands of years, that's gone through a lot of process. So if you can understand the basic processes that are added, that have added solutes to the water, perhaps you can then design your system so that you're not damaged, or so that you're not at least aware of how this solutes became in this water, and therefore you can at least maybe mitigate any changes or be aware of that your action may have an impact on it. Because water quality, we use a fairly narrow range for drinking water. I mean, it's just from say a few hundred parts per million or milligrams per liter up to a couple of thousand is a very narrow range when you look at the brines and the dilute water.
Oh, yeah.
So humans and most animals that exist on planet Earth have a very narrow range of water quality that is acceptable. And so we have to be well aware that as we use the water many times, as we do, we're essentially drinking the pee of dinosaurs. I mean, all our water has gone through a lot of animals over the
Oh,
history of
yes.
millions of years. So somewhere in your one molecule that you had in your coffee this morning may have been pee from a dinosaur. I'm being facetious here, but I just do want to say that there's a lot of interesting chemistry that is it tells a story.
Yes, it does. It does. Well, but that adds talking to you. I'm thinking because what I've been studying lately, and that's why I'm working on that, bringing you and other people to talk, is that we have that understanding and of the. Not sure if you're familiar with the biotic pump, how the forests bring water to the continents, right?
Yes.
So what is happening is that lots of people, and that theory was that theory came up in 2007, which is amazing that nobody actually thought about that before, right? The power of the condensation of water to bring more water to the ocean from the oceans to the continents, right? So
Yes.
now we understand that. So what I see is that we're now, when a blind man trying to understand an elephant, that's the thing. We're
Yes.
seeing the big picture now, and we're going down to the details. But the thing is that we have lots of tools to understand that. So if we can actually bring more water to the continents, so we're gonna have more rain. So a source of water to the continents is always rain that comes from the ocean, right? We'll
Yeah.
have to think about that. So that's a thing about quantity of water. Plus, there is a thing about the quality. It's not easy just to make the water back, put the water back to the aquifers. It doesn't go that easily, right? With a lot of oxygen on it, we know that it needs to it needs time through the unsaturated zone and things like that. So, what's your thinking about all these details for us to let's say to tame in the future and make water more, more quantity and quality and stored in the continents for the future.
Well, that's interesting that you're bringing in the water quality because most of the emphasis has been on floods and
Yep.
droughts, and there has been relatively little broad scale thinking. And actually, John Cherry and I have had long discussions about a kind of globalization. We need to look at groundwater in particular in terms of a global aspect. Most groundwater is locally, it's a local supply or it's a local contamination. And so most of hydrogeology has been involved with very local areas, occasionally some regional studies, generally by governments. But very few, very little on a global scale. And John is very much interested in dewatering and the aspects of how to utilize groundwater quantitatively. And I've been trying to look at what the global picture of water chemistry, solid chemistry, not water quality so much, but solid chemistry. And then a couple of years ago, we published several papers on the average concentration using a geospatial machine learning approach. We put together a series of maps of various solutes to again to get a kind of try to get a global picture of what groundwater is. Ward Sanford, who I worked with USGS, is now retired. Uh, uh, added added solute flux to our concentration. So we really have a flux now, a mass flux that we're able to do for almost all of the major elements and many of the minor elements. That's why I was able to. I mentioned silica earlier.
Yeah.
We looked at. I'm in the process of looking at the role of what the silica input is into the riverine system, and then what we see coming out, and how much is lost and or sequestered. I mean, it'd be lost, but it's sequestered. And so we're trying to do this on a global basis. I'm also interested in sulfur and how what there's a lot of processes going on that remove sulfur in an in-stream and in wetlands associated with the riverine system. So it's this is, as I say, it's an attempt to try to uh, uh, see globally what will happen because I think we have to have an understanding of what's going on naturally before we can make any kind of informed engineering decisions to control what's happening. We want, as I say, our ultimate goal is sustainability. And so you really need to know what's going on naturally before you can, I think, before you can feel comfortable in an engineering system of changing, monitoring, or modifying your water resources.
Let me ask you one thing. Yeah, well, can we, let's say that we have all the resources and can we actually feel comfortable understanding the natural groundwater system and or water systems in general before we change it? Do we have enough tools today to do that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can make a start at it. Obviously, you're always data limited and data that's very expensive to accumulate, as you're well aware. But I think we can make, there's some, as I say, through my son's contribution, he's been working with geospatial machine learning for 20 years in geophysics. and I
Okay.
asked him to see if he could use his techniques to help us in understanding the water, the solid chemistry. And so that was his contribution, which was a major contribution in our. And he's a co-author of I think there's 4 papers now that have been published, and working on a couple more. So the point is that yes, I think we can get a start. We never have enough information to be completely confident, but you can at least be aware that there's something else going on that you need to think about.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So, well, if we have one thing that people are trying, and that's something that concerns me. We have, for example, you mentioned, and I'd like you to explain the warm of weathering that you mentioned in your potential paper there, right? Because what I see is that we have a very, very high uh, level of attention towards CO2 today, right? And for us, water people, water is so much more important than CO2, right? Uh, so I'm a believer that we need water in all the aspects of water and the water vapor and how it cools the planet has to be involved in the economy, just like carbon is now. Before we have ways of compensating that economically, we're not going to move forward. That's how I understand. And one of the things that people are trying to do is, for example, to compensate by the amount of mass solute that you add to the water, or that you take away from the water. For example, you release water with some solution, some concentrations, but then the natural concentrations is lower. You have to compensate that. Should we think about that? What would be the first ions you would think of to start compensating? What would be the important ones that you consider for compensation?
Well, there's only seven major ions constitute 95% of the total
Oh,
solids, but they're not necessarily the ones that are health related. We need to worry about arsenic, and we need to worry about fluoride, and we need to worry, and these are only a tiny, tiny fraction. They're really minor, very minor solutes as in terms of the total solids, but they're important. So you have to kind of think about from a economics of the resource how much money you want to spend in remediation or I don't know, it's remediation, but in controlling those, you'd have to identify those particular elements that are important in that particular area because there's a large, many areas of the world don't have a problem with arsenic or fluoride or other elements, but some do, and so your focus would be on those areas. So it's site specific, I believe, and so that's a sort of again an engineering decision as to what is it worth to remove this, and are you, if you don't, are you aware of the consequences of this? So yeah, it's hard to say, but many of those water quality, that becomes water quality as it related to man's activities. Uh, those are local decisions, and they would depend on the particular solid distribution.
Yes, but yeah, I agree with you. But with hydrogeologists, when we talk about that with lawyers and economists, they want to pick one to start with or two, and they're already doing that. They're
Yeah.
picking one particular solid and start with that, right? So at least they can use everywhere, and they can find a price for it. And I'm a bit concerned of that because I have the same impression that you have, right? That it's site specific,
Yeah.
right? But at least
I
maybe you could rank something to have a way out of this.
I
Uh,
don't know. Economists are really interesting folks. I really enjoy working with the economists. They have a different perspective on
oh
things,
yeah.
and uh, totally different than mine. And I'm always come away kind of really impressed with how their approach to things. I don't always agree with it, but it's interesting the thought process. And I don't. Again, I don't. Can't get. I'm just not an economist. I can't make any comments about things. But I really do feel that you have to put a value on what is the value of a arsenic that has 1 milligram per liter concentration. Should we remove it before we use it? Or should we say, well, you can only use it for growing crops, but not consumption?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of policy, and boy, that's really way out of my area of expertise, and
Yeah,
I don't really
exactly,
comment
exactly.
on things like that.
But let me tell you that there is this new concept people are using. They call volumetric water benefit. Have you heard of it?
No, I
Yeah, yeah.
haven't. But again, that's out of my area. I
I
worry.
know it's out of you, but you should take a look out of curiosity at least.
Oh, yes.
Because the concept is quite interesting because they're not putting a price, for example, because we can easily say how much it costs to remove arsenic or whatever from water. We know that, right?
Yeah.
But then we have a risk always of having price for water, and water is something difficult to put a price on it because it's essential for life, so it's difficult, and it's cultural problems and everything. So they're trying to put a given value to the benefit you're offering. For example, you're saving this amount of water for irrigation, so this has a value because if you use this much and you decrease, it could be compensated. You can get money out of the benefit that you're promoting. That's a neat idea. That's a neat
Yeah.
idea. I see. But then you can do the same for quality. Let's say instead of only the price of removal, for example, but then it's the benefit that you can offer to an ecological system, for example. A given contaminant is very bad for that region, and you're enhancing that. So it's a way of going. It's a way of getting
Well,
around the price of water in itself.
well, the one again in sustainability, if you're talking about reusing water, you have to be really careful, and that's why it's important to know a little bit about the geochemistry, how
Yep.
that solid got in that thing, because you can avoid increasing the concentration if you do certain things that
Yep.
may be economically viable or it may be uneconomic, and that's really a useful piece of information. So again, I don't want to promote geochemistry over everything else, but it's part of the whole water
Oh yeah.
resources. It needs to be considered in sustainability.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So back to the warm of weathering. Tell us about the
Well,
CO2.
Well, what is, as all scientists right now are interested in global climate change. And there's essentially two ways geologically that we can remove carbon dioxide. You either sequester it by burying organic material, that'll ultimately remove it or at least sequester it for tens to hundreds of millions of years.
Yep.
Or the geochemists have proposed that you can weather the rocks and you change CO2 to a bicarbonate ion, which is in the liquid, and that is discharged to the oceans, and it reacts with calcium to form calcium carbonate, a
And
limestone, which is again sequestered for hundreds of millions of years. Those are the two models that if you look at deep geologic time, you'll see that there's been large variations in temperature from something like 40 degrees down to 2 or 3 degrees over the last 500 million years or so. And the question is, which of these models are they both viable, or what's the story? And what I've in part of our looking at the overall large scale aspects of groundwater in the work that, as I said, John Cherry and I have been discussing for years. We finally published these 3 or 4 articles on this. It shows that groundwater is about 90 or more than 90% of the total solutes that are coming out of the river. We measure the amount of carbon in water resources or water by measuring what comes out of the streams globally. And we've been doing that for 150 years. I found a reference to a guy in Scotland in 1887 who made the first really interesting viable estimate of the global of the amount of solids coming out. But it wasn't until we really separated essentially the solutes in a stream are the result of either storm runoff or groundwater. Those are the 2 sources, and we know the total. So if we know either the amount of groundwater solids coming in, we can calculate the amount of surface runoff. Well, it turns out that there's very little in the terms of the surface water. It's it's largely a groundwater thing, and what I have calculated, or what I'm suggesting, is that aquifer systems are the womb of weathering, which flow the ruin of continents and the nutrients of life. Very poetic. I was trying to be uh, poetic in trying to sell this because, again, not a lot of people are interested in the mass flux of
Oh,
calcium
yes.
coming out of.
Agree,
It's
agree.
hard. It's a hard sell, but I try to put it into a little more of a poetic to get at least get their attention. But essentially, what we've seen is that there's essentially no impact of or very little impact of weathering of rocks controlling CO2. So it must be uh, vegetation, burying of vegetation, growth of vegetation is probably the most, looks as though it's the most important aspect. And weathering is a relatively minor component of controlling CO2, which is a big change. I'm not sure it'll be published. I've submitted it to science, and they'll reject 95% of their papers, so this will probably be rejected. But it changes the way we think, and I think it's an important observation that weathering has relatively little from the atmosphere. Weathering, most of the weathering occurs in the aquifer systems, largely in the Vados domain, but it's isolated from the atmosphere. So,
Yeah,
in
true.
fact, there's a huge carbon flux out of the Vados domain into the atmosphere, and you can't go against the gradient. So there's no CO2 coming from the atmosphere into the into the Vados domain. It's all generated in situ from dissolved organic carbon and particulate organic carbon that moves down into the Vados domain. And so anyway, I think it changes the way we think, and I think it looks good. But I'm anxious to get it out and published and get some input from other people, other folks. It's probably going to step on a few toes of the some National Academy people. So
Well,
I may disappear. This may be the last interview.
well, but when I talked to you when I read your abstract, and I was thinking about that because when we relate, you have a new idea or a new proposition, let's say, and you based on science, and it's very likely you have to think and have to discuss with other people. That's how science evolves, right?
That's
But
right.
but then we have today this system of a peer review system that vets the most of the papers. So
Well, it's a really tough to get a new idea. It's really
I
the
understand
scientific
because
community.
it's if you're not adding and especially when you're talking about CO2 today. if you have a new idea, period,
Oh,
it's very hard to
it's
be against the mainstream. Very.
That's, as I say, this is going to be a difficult
It is.
concept to push, and I'm not naive that this is going to be accepted.
I know, but
Uh,
what I was thinking is that you know the in physics they have a different way of publishing things. You know how they work. The archives things. You've heard of that?
I'm
No.
not familiar with it.
Okay, so they have a system. It's called archive, ARCHIV, right? Uh, and you just submit. You submit a paper, you publish there, right? And
Hmm.
nobody says no. But then it is open for
Discussion.
anyone to criticize and write about it, right? In your
But the,
paper. So it is peer reviewed by a number of people. And at least
well, that sounds like a really great idea because
it
I've
is. It
in
is.
my career, I've been constantly battling existing things. When I was in the high plains of Texas, working in with an aquifer storage and recovery system, I stumbled upon the idea that the playa lakes, there's 20,000 of them on the high plain. They're very interesting topographically, and everybody had their view on it. And I really demonstrated quite quantitatively that they were a result of essentially a karst feature. And they weren't from buffalo wallows, and they weren't from other
Okay.
meteorite impacts or other kinds of interesting proposals that people have had. But boy, selling that was just really painful. And again, there's a science is very conservative, as it should be. You don't want to
Oh
immediately
yeah,
adopt
yeah, I
a
agree. I
new. I'm
agree.
not complaining, but it is a new idea. It's really tough. And then I worked in the Arabian Gulf area, and the Sabkas, they were it's a saline environment, and those were presumably as a result of water being blown up on their very low coastal things, and the water blown out of the Arabian Gulf onto there, evaporating and concentrating because they're about 10,000, they're about 10 times seawater. So there's,
Okay.
but if you start looking at the chemistry in detail, it's impossible, and it turns out it's just groundwater evaporating. But again, selling that still the current. I just recently saw a recent book that was published on this, and it still maintains this old view that it's physically impossible. But so I'm kind of used to dealing with rejection. I understand about rejection. I expect this will be rejected, but
But you know,
that's well, we'll
you know,
see.
but I think people. I tried. I talked about this possibility of using this methodology, the archive, like the
I like that.
physics. And people say, well, but then we have a risk of publishing bad papers. So
That's
okay,
right.
but
And somebody will quote it, and it gets into the literature, and man,
exactly,
it's
but
really
the other
not a big
people
deal.
would but smart people would say it's wrong, and you can discuss about that. And some other
Well,
smart guys may say, oh, it's right. And
yeah.
then you have more, you have more options of seeing
Well,
new
well,
ideas.
the downside of that is people like Mr. Trump or our current president would take something and just beat it to death, even though it's wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so
Well,
there we
yeah, right.
are. So you hate to get anything that's wrong because once it gets in there, as I'm finding, it's really really difficult to dislodge an idea. And many of these wrong ideas are kind of, gee, intuitively that sounds like a reasonable thing. But when you start doing the mass fluxes and start doing the
Oh, yeah.
really detailed stuff, it just can't happen. You know,
I agree with you. Well,
so
you know,
it's an interesting concept. Now,
I
have the
agree.
physicists resolved? You say they use it in physics. Have they resolved their problem, or is it a problem in physics at all?
Well, in physics, I know it's been working for years already, and
Okay.
yeah, many years, 20 or so.
Okay. Well, I wasn't aware of it, but
Yeah,
that's
because
interesting.
it's just there. But that would be something because today we have, we have internet, so it's easy to take a look and agree or disagree, and not only to the paper itself, but to the comments. So the comments are there, and if they based on science, fine, you can take your own conclusions from the discussion, and that should be open. That's my understanding. So I talked to some people, but nobody really wants to do that. One of the things is that for us in hydrogeology, for example, you're going to find with the big publishers.
Yeah, that's it.
Because that's a killer. That's a
Going to
killer.
go along with that, or no, they're not. They're going to not want to do that. They want to sell the journals, obviously.
Oh yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's tough. Okay, so I think our time is up here, Warren. That was very nice again talking to you. Always enlightening. I love you, and I'm still sad that I didn't get your picture there, the painting.
I don't know what was wrong with
Me neither. It's the Brazilian post. That's terrible.
They sent it back, and then there was no value.
But I'll find a way. When I visit the next time I go to US, I'll ask you to stand to the hotel there. That'll be easier.
I still have it right on my desk here, so it's there, and I'd love to have you use that cover because I thought it was really an interesting idea.
I will. Don't worry. All right. Thank you very much, Warren. Again, nice talking to you as usual. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.